Okay. So our luck has had it that this morning we just are not doing too good. So we're going to try and make the best of it, the best that we can. So welcome everybody. For those of you that don't know me, but I think everybody online knows me, Becky Setledge, County Extension Agent. I oversee the 4-H Youth Development Program. And yeah, and so today we're going to go ahead and get started because we're a little bit behind schedule. We have 3 wonderful presenters today. And yeah, and so I'm glad that you guys were able to be a part of this. And so today, our guests that we have here include all the way from Minnesota is Chris Brown. Chris, you want to wave? Yeah, thanks. Yeah, so Chris was one of our presenters last year, as you remember, and he's been growing giants for 5 years, and in that short time, he's racked up quite a number of nice giants. He grows giant pumpkins, giant squash, giant bushel gourds, long gourds, giant watermelons, giant tomatoes, giant sunflower, giant head sunflowers, I should say, giant onions, giant eggplant, tall corn, giant rutabaga.
He could just everything.
Everything. He grows everything. And he has and he has a personal best with his pumpkin at 1,464 pounds, 132 pound watermelon, and then a long gourd that measured just over 118 inches. And he also holds some state records, which include the giant tomato at 9.06 pounds, a bushel gourd at 331 pounds, and also holds a state record for tall sunflowers at 20 feet 3 inches, and then a wide head sunflower at 32 inches, and an eggplant at 4.72 pounds. And so he also has a world record butternut squash. And so thank you, Chris, for being here again. And I see that there are a couple more people popping on. And so yeah, so hopefully people will just keep on coming on in as they as we continue on. Okay, so then over in Michigan, we've got Cecil. Some of you guys have been chatting with him already. So you can see him, he's waving up there. All right, and so Cecil has been growing for 45 years, and 10 years ago, he decided to try his hand at growing a giant pumpkin. And his first attempt, he ended up with a 1,180 pound pumpkin with the use of a soil calculator, which he can probably talk to you a little bit more about today. In 2013, he grew his pumpkin to 1,312 pounds. Each year, his pumpkins had continued to grow at 1,714 pounds in 2014, and then in 2015 he won with a 1,921 pound pumpkin. Poor weather conditions in 2016 and 2017 kind of dropped his weights, but we're still good for first place at local competitions with a 1,553 pound and a 1,701 pound pumpkins respectively. And so he says that things haven't really changed over the last few years, although he is going to be growing in a greenhouse this year. So thank you, Cecil, for being here again. Cecil has been part of our seminars in the past as well, as some of you might remember. And so if you have any soil questions, here's a man to go to. And yeah, hopefully we can get those questions answered. And then last but not least, we have Cindy Tobeck from Washington. And as some of you guys remember, we also had her last year. And Cindy is active in both the Pacific Northwest giant pumpkin growers and Pacific giant vegetable growers, where she's held board positions and served as the newsletter editor for several years. She currently serves on the international governing body, the GPC, as a newsletter editor and the West Coast regional representative. She has held or currently holds Washington state records for giant pumpkin, field pumpkin, giant cabbage, long gourd, bushel gourd, and giant squash. And her personal best pumpkin is 2,002 pounds, and personal best squash is at 2,030 pounds. She's won several weigh-offs in Washington, Oregon, and California, including the prestigious Half Moon Bay World Championship. in 2021, she became the world champion GPC master gardener. And when Cindy isn't in the garden, you're going to find her either in her third grade classroom or riding one of her horses. So thank you again, Cindy, and the rest of our presentation or presenters, Cecil and Chris, for being here. Again, I can't tell you how much I appreciate you guys taking, this weekend off to be a part of our program, and how lucky we are to be able to learn from some of the best of the best. So anyway, so for those of you that have never been a part of our program before, just a couple quick notes as a couple of you have come on. If you wouldn't mind doing me the favor and signing in, and just use the chat box and then sign in with your name and everybody that's in your party. And then if you wouldn't mind telling us where you're from, because I know that we do have one family from Oahu, from what I can see. I think the rest of them are from the Big Island. And then we do have one person on the phone, which I'm not sure who that is. And so, so again, thank you, everybody. Yeah, so the way this typically works is, again, we're very informal here. So all you need to do is just unmute yourself and ask away with your questions. And then, if you're too shy, which hopefully everybody here is not too shy, but if you don't feel like unmuting, you can put your question in the chat box, and we will go ahead and try to monitor that as we're able. So, do you mind taking? See if you can answer some of those. Still getting people trying to log on and still having some difficulties. Okay, so yeah, so to get the ball rolling, does anybody have some questions for our presenters? Don't come all silent, everybody. Tell you what, I have some door prizes here for the first person that wants to ask a question.
Oh, I was going to go for one.
Okay, go ahead, Tony.
Since we've been getting so much rain, your recommendation is to keep our plants or seedlings inside, or would it be okay to put them in the ground, even and have it covered, or could we just wait?
Were you guys able to hear Tony's question?
Yeah.
So Tony, this is Chris. I would always get your seedlings in the ground as soon as you can. If you're having issues with a lot of rain and your soil doesn't have good drainage, yes, putting a tarp or something over it to, get the water away from the plants would be ideal. But yeah, seedlings in the ground are a lot better than seedlings in a pot. So
I totally and completely agree with that. As soon as you can, get them out there, because if they're in a pot, the roots can't stretch out. If it is super, super wet, then you can do things like, put an umbrella over the top of the area or something and try to help dry it out. You don't want to plant in mud, but at the same time, you can always throw a bag of potting soil out to help dry it out a little bit too.
Yeah, first, well, concerning with that one there, since I can't find any ground that's not soaked in water. Would repotting them be okay then? Would they be okay if I pot them in a bigger pot, and then in a bigger pot until the weather changes where we can put them in the ground?
It depends. So like, especially for squash, they don't like their roots to be messed with too much. So I honestly put down 2 or 3 bags of dry potting soil and plant them in that. And then that'll soak up some of the water from the surround, make a mound so that it's not sitting in a pool. And then the potting soil will help draw some of that moisture away, and because it'll be dry. And then that'll help you know, get your plant in the ground. And I mean, you don't want to, it's hard to drown them. You can drown them.
Tell me how big of a plant in right now, and how many leaves does your plant have?
Cindy, that was a little difficult to hear you. You want to repeat what you just said?
Of a, is this plant?
Must be having bandwidth issues or?
Audio's not working.
Yeah, I can't hear you at all, Cindy.
But yeah, every time you disturb those roots, you're going to stunt that plant. It's going to set it back a couple days. So the least you can do, the better. Like Cecil said, even if you have to get it into some wet soil, you can work on, you know, what I've done before is just a tarp and lean it to the lower side of your garden where it slopes away just to get that water away. But repotting it just is going to stress your plant.
Hey, Tony, can you hear me now? Yeah. Okay, my question to you is how big of a pot is your plant in right now? And how many leaves does it have?
It's in a 5-gallon pot right now, and it has about six leaves right now.
You've
Okay,
still got a little bit of time.
you've got time then. Yeah. I would say if it was in like a 2.5 gallon pot and it was that big, it would be starting to get kind of root bound in there, but in a 5-gallon bucket, you've got a little time. The only thing that you're gonna really have to consider, even though you've got another good week of time, is when you tip that upside down, invert it to get it out of there, you're essentially gonna have at the 6-leaf stage a vine that you're gonna be wrestling around. And you know, that could get a little hairy when you're trying to get that in the ground to not bend it or break any leaves off. So ASAP, but you do have a little time as far as roots go.
Like Cecil said, use that 5 gallons of dirt and then mound up potting soil or some sort of dry soil around it to make that mound. Then you'll never have to worry about the plant sitting in actual water. And then that way, 6 leaves, even though it's 5 gallons, the longer it's going to be a vine pretty soon. And that makes things difficult. And if you snap something, then it sets you back even more. So get it in as soon as you can. I know you're on vacation, so you have to wait till after, right?
You might consider cutting the bucket in half too. I've actually cut buckets in half to plant in and tape them together. And then whenever you go to plant it, it's a lot easier to get it planted. Because Cindy's right, turning a 5-gallon bucket over with a plant in it and trying to keep from destroying the plant's tough.
Yeah,
Thank you,
you have a
guys.
sawzall. Yeah, you have a sawzall. I must have a delay. If you have a sawzall, or that would probably help.
I have a chainsaw. I have a chainsaw.
Does somebody else
Yeah, I
have
have
a
a
question?
question.
Go for it, Lisa.
Yes, that one year I would get really nice pumpkins. In fact, I must have had about 4 or 5. They get as big as a soccer ball, and then they just deflated.
You're not getting them pollinated. So they'll grow about the size of a basketball, soccer ball. And if they weren't pollinated, they'll die.
I thought I got them pollinated. Something to look for then this time. Thank you.
Any questions from anybody out here?
What have they done to help protect against that?
Okay, so there was a question over here. What about blossom end rot? Does anybody want to address that? On what you guys have done to manage that? What, I guess with your tomatoes or? Oh, with giant pumpkins.
Hmm.
I really
I've
have
never
never
really
had that. It might be that you have some kind of a disease in your soil. It might actually be something besides blossom end rot. I have had some, and I'm not sure if I remember, it might be anthracnose, where it'll put spots all over it and the blossom will rot. And I think, are you sure, is it rotting whenever it's real small before it gets started, or is it after it's bigger?
Hmm.
So I know you guys live in a very wet climate, a very humid climate. So one thing you're going to have to do more so than me in the Midwest here is you're going to have to pay attention to that blossom end. And if you have to put a fan on it, just something to move that air around it. Because if the blossom end does get a little too much moisture, it is possible that you can have some rotting happening. So pay real close attention to that and around the stem area. And then underneath, down where the pumpkin touches, hopefully it's on sand and some sort of a foam or a mill fabric. But those would be your three kind of contact points where I think you being in that more humid side of, the Hilo side of Hawaii, you're going to deal with a lot more humidity.
So is it the actual, the nub where that sticks out? Does that start rotting and then it goes into the pumpkin, or is it the actual flesh of the pumpkin that starts to rot?
The nub that sticks out and then it goes into the pumpkin.
Nice and loud.
Yeah. It was the nub that sticks out and then went into the pumpkin afterwards.
Okay, so those sometimes do get soft. If you take the blossom completely off early and put a fan on it, you can keep it dry and it gets hard. It doesn't really provide a function after the flower is pollinated, and you can trim that off flush. Now you got to be careful because that is the thinnest part of the pumpkin. So you don't want to go, deep, but if you trim it off flush, and then a lot of us will dust it with some sulfur and put a fan on it to keep it dry. That little nub sometimes will get some soft spots on it. You can use peroxide if there's ever any softness or brownness on that, because typically it's going to be maybe even a bacterial infection. It might be a bug bite. It might be something like that. And it's not necessarily the flesh of the pumpkin rotting, but the bacteria eating the dying flesh, and then it kind of feeds on itself.
So did that answer it, or did you have something to share? Or?
I'll show you.
Okay, he's got a picture.
My last year pumpkin. If I can-
I might have to turn off.
There it is.
Oh. Can you see that, Cecil?
Yeah, I see it. I don't know if that started from the nub or not. It kind of looks like the flesh of the pumpkin got infected of some sort.
That's water damage here.
So I had a pumpkin that kind of had something similar to that. It didn't show on the outside as much, but eventually I could just push my finger into the actual blossom and it went right in. And then when I cut the pumpkin open, I could see there was first off, the wall was real thin, but there was some sort of an infection, probably bacterial in nature. And it kind of turned everything on the inside around that nub brown. And interesting was it was in my patch in the wettest area, the lowest part. So I do attribute stuff like that to too much moisture in one form or another. And how it happened, how it started there, why it started there, I have no idea. But I had something similar to that.
Does that help? Okay. All right, so I do have somebody that texted me their question. And so they wanted to find out best product for blossom end rot on tomatoes. Blossom end rot, which does affect tomatoes. It's a calcium deficiency or uptake issue. What do the pros use?
So
For
Chris
me,
is the better tomato grower, but just real quick, what I've found with tomatoes is if you don't have constant moisture, you can have blossom problems.
Cindy?
Yeah.
You had, oh, go ahead, Chris,
Go.
I'm sorry.
No, Cindy can go. That's fine.
I was just gonna say, kind of similar to what Cecil was saying, the moisture level in the tomato patch needs to be very consistent. And I would err on the side of too little water as opposed to too much water. I don't know that there's any product really that is the silver bullet for preventing blossom end rot or curing blossom end rot. I have reversed it. I've halted it and let the tomato continue to grow the fruit by using sulfur, mixing a little sulfur paste and putting it where some blossom end rot has started. That dries out the flesh. The only problem is that area, even though the tomato fruit will continue to grow, that area tends to ripen up faster because of the blossom end rot, and you're overall not going to get as big of a tomato as you would have had you not even gotten that to begin with. So I think the best thing you can do for the tomatoes is just prevent that by not over watering and keep your water absolutely consistent and on the dry side of things. And so in where I live here in Washington, we in the springtime particularly get a lot of rain, and so I grow my tomatoes under a cover to keep them from getting fluctuations in the water.
And just to echo what the other two said, I have found, because my area is, we have endless amounts of calcium. So whenever I see somebody say calcium's the reason, I chuckle a little bit because we have plenty of calcium, but the water, whenever we get a lot of water, whether it's big rainstorms or anything like that, and the tomatoes at a certain kind of, days old, that's when I usually see it start. So I know it has to do with something with the amount of moisture, the amount of water, whether it's binding up calcium and not allowing the calcium to do its thing. I don't know. I have no idea, but it does. I've noticed that blossom end rot has something to do with inconsistent or over watering. So in your area, it would probably be like Cindy does, advantageous to keep, some sort of a tarp cover you can cover your garden or your plants with to keep the moisture out, so you can control it a little more.
And I will say, I have heard the calcium thing for years and years and years, way before I started growing giants. Since I started growing giants, I've really done a lot. I mean, probably tens of thousands of hours of reading. And calcium is not mobile. So adding a calcium product to a plant is not going to cause the plant to have more calcium in it. So I always take those things, especially whenever sometimes it's people echoing it because they've heard it before, but a lot of times it might be a product that's selling something. And I always look at that as, if somebody's trying to sell you something, you got to kind of go a little bit farther than just taking what they say and buying their product. I mean, it would have to help. And I haven't actually seen any of those things help. And just for the simple fact that in science, calcium is not mobile throughout the plant. Adding calcium to a plant is not going to have more calcium.
Okay. Any other questions?
So we shouldn't add calcium to the soil, it's not necessary?
So did you hear that, Cecil? Nice and loud.
Cecil, so we shouldn't add calcium to the soil, it's not necessary for any plant?
I still didn't hear you. Something about adding calcium is all I heard.
We don't need to add calcium?
To the plant, no. So calcium needs to be there. There's a relationships between all of the nutrients that the calcium is we say the calcium is the bus and the boron is the driver. So things, whenever the building blocks, whenever the plant cells are forming, they use calcium. But once the plant is formed, and especially whenever the fruit is happening, adding calcium to the fruit or the plant is putting it on it, but it's not going inside of it. It's not mobile. So it has to be there in the right amounts with all of the other nutrients in a balance, so that whenever the cells are created, they're strong and healthy cells.
Okay, I have a question. I'm new to everything. What size, I can't find the notes on what size pot I should buy for the tomato.
Are you going to grow your tomato in a pot the entire season?
Yes.
Okay, then I would personally, I would just get as big as you can.
Okay.
You know, if that's a 12 gallon, a 15, a 20. I've grown tomatoes in a 20 or 22 gallon pot. And the thing is and if you can get air pots, that's even better. But
Air pots.
What?
Okay.
Yep, air pots are better because it'll prune the roots, and you should have less root bounding, especially in the heavier moisture areas within the pot. But the key with anything in a pot is you have to do a very regular, stringent feeding. You have to keep them fed because they will use up the nutrients so quickly in a pot that it ends up hurting the plant and stunting it. And especially if you're trying to grow giant tomatoes, if you're just eating tomatoes, it's easier. But if you're growing giant tomatoes, it gets very tough because you can rarely, I shouldn't say rarely, it's a tougher situation to feed that plant with everything it needs to attain those large size fruits.
Okay, thank you.
Hey, Becky, I'm going to share something real quick.
Sure, go for it.
Can you guys see this?
Yes.
Did I share the right screen? Do you
I see your, yeah, I see your whole desktop.
Oh, you see my whole desktop?
Yeah. So I don't know if you want to make your,
Hang on. I shared the
A little
wrong
bigger.
screen, I think. How about now?
It's your chart, Cecil, from the newsletter, it looks like.
Yeah. So some
Yeah.
of you may have seen this in the newsletter.
oh, I think you
It
clicked
just
out on
went
it.
away.
Oh, wait a minute. So I thought I had it. Hang on. Now I can't get a hold of it again.
Oh, no.
There we go. There we go.
Nope.
All right.
Oh, there it is. Yeah. There you go. Yeah, expand it. There
So
we
so
go.
this is your main nutrients that are out there, and these are nitrogens and your potassium and your magnesium and your calcium. All right. All of those work in tandem, and they work in tandem with your boron and your silicon and your molybdenum. And then they work against your sulfurs and your chlorides and your phosphorus and your copper and your cobalt and your iron and your magnesium and your zinc. So when I talk about balance, you can't overwhelm any part of this with any one thing. the different molecules are different sizes, so they take up more space. Like a calcium molecule might attract, I don't even know what it is right off the top of my head, but it might attract 100 different particles of all these other things. So that's where the calcium is important, is in your soil in relationship to everything. It has to be what, and that's basically what I have spent the last 8 to 9 years trying to help people and prove that balancing the soil is the most important part. It's not simply just piling on a whole bunch of fertilizer. Some people get lucky and it works, but the people that get it balanced are successful year after year after year after year. And the people that I've helped, I've helped people that have been very successful and help them to get their soil more balanced, and they have huge increases, 30 to 50, even 60% increases just from getting their soil balanced. So that's where, if you do, especially if you do tissue testing, it helps you dial in. And whenever you're looking at a plant and you think it might be a calcium deficiency, if you were to do a tissue test, it would tell you whether you had a calcium deficiency or not. So anyway, I just wanted to show you that, there's a relationship between a whole lot of things. That's it.
Thanks, Cecil.
Question?
Go ahead, Tony.
Question on that. What would you recommend to get the test or soil tests on? As they ask like NPK, we can get a test for that. But then the secondary ones, what they don't really do a combination of everything, all the iron, zinc, and those secondary ones. So what would you recommend when we go to get our soil tested? What would we ask for?
So most labs, and I don't know about the labs where you're at, but most labs will have what they call a complete test. For sure, you want NPK, calcium, magnesium, and then a set of micronutrients. And usually the most common micronutrients and the ones that are the most common and the ones that matter the most are the copper, the zinc, the iron, the manganese, the zinc, and the boron. And if I could only, I have seen some labs where you have to pay for each one of those micronutrient tests separately, and it's $2 or $3. If I had to cut corners, I would probably cut corners and I would really get the boron, because I think the boron, magnesium, and calcium trifecta is the most important balance. And then if you had another one, it would probably be most likely would be the manganese. I don't know about in Hawaii, but typically soils are lower in manganese than these giants need. So I always, whenever, I would say 85% of the soil tests that I look at, and I look at upwards of 300 to 400 every single year, are low in manganese.
Thanks, Cecil. I was just going to mention, and Cindy, I could see was putting it in the chat box, that this information is in her newsletter that she just put out. Is that right, Cindy?
Yes.
Yeah, Cecil, the last 2 issues has put some great contributions in there, along with a few other good growers from around the world.
Yeah, so if you guys go to the to our Facebook page, I did mention that here recently when Cindy put out the last issue. So you might want to check that out and yeah, read up more on what Cecil has on soils.
Yeah, and if you go to the winter 2021 or 2022, whatever this last winter one was called, because I have all the back issues online, you'll be able to see a really great article, very comprehensive, that Cecil wrote on the cover, and talking about growing giant pumpkins and getting the soil balanced, among many other topics.
Yeah, I want to encourage everybody to check out the newsletters that Cindy puts out. There's really a lot of great information. What was that about the?
Is that on the Facebook page, the Cindy's letters?
Just the recent one, just kind of like a link so that you could get it, but I can send that to you. Yeah, yeah. So, or anybody else, if you don't have it or would like it, let me know, or you can contact Cindy directly. And
You just have to go on GPC1 and register.
mhm.
Yeah, I put them out 4 times a year, and lots of really great information, not just about giant pumpkins, but all kinds of giants, as well as way off recaps and what's going on around the world.
Okay, so just kind of a little FYI for those of you that have been asking questions. I've been kind of putting down your names every time you're asking, and we're dropping them into my little jar here. We're gonna be doing some door prizes. So maybe what we'll do is maybe we'll do a door prize right now while people are thinking about some other questions that they might be able to ask. Okay, and so Charles, come on up, and I'm gonna let you, I'm shaking this up pretty good, and Mr. Charles is gonna come over here and help pick one for me. And let's see, why don't we do, we've been talking a lot about tomatoes today, and I was lucky enough to grab a few, well, let me see if I can turn off my screen in the back. Oh, come on. Then you guys
If
can
you hold
see.
it in front of you, it should work.
You think? It does not, it didn't show it very well, but let me try again. Get out of this. Okay. Okay, can you see that?
Yeah.
So I've got this really good tomato, giant tomatoes book, and has some great information. And I know a lot of people that have used it and said that it has some good information. I don't know what our presenters, if they've used this book or know anything about it, but it's a very hard one to get a hold of. So I was lucky enough to get a few copies of it, and we're going to go ahead and give that to the next person that Charles draws out. So go ahead and stick your hand in there, and oh, don't get it stuck here. I thought I got a small enough one for these kids' hands. So, all right, and the winner is and I know I'm butchering names, but is it Kiana?
Yes, it's Kiana.
Okay, yeah, I said it right. All right, so we're sending you that book, and what I'll do is I'll get a hold of Christine. Kiana is on Oahu, and so so different island than the Big Island, and so congratulations, and yeah, this is great. And so I'll make sure that I get that to Christine, and then she'll help you to get that. All right.
Okay, thank you, Becky. Appreciate
All
it.
right, let's do one more door prize while everybody's still thinking, and let's see this one on here. I have some fabric bags from last year. They're 5 gallon. I don't know. Are we doing a 5 gallon bucket challenge again this year? Do you know anybody? Cindy or Chris? Have you heard if we're going to be doing the 5 gallon bucket challenge again this year?
I haven't heard this year. I just know that we're doing
The team
the
challenge.
draft
Mhm.
regular. Yeah.
Okay. Well, in anticipation of thinking that we might do the 5 gallon bucket challenge, I did get some buckets and some fabric bags. And so, and oh boy, Tony, it's your lucky day today. You're going to get one of those. So you'll get your choice. I have either the fabric bag or the bucket. So, so I got a 5 gallon bucket for you. All right. So, all
How
right.
many times you put his name in there?
Well, every time somebody has a question, I'm going to be putting their name in. That's why it's a good idea to ask questions. Let's do one more. And this
I
one,
registered like 5 times too.
yeah, this one here, we're going to give away. Let's see, what should we give away? I got a nice John Deere ball cap here. Let's see who gets that. Lisa, woohoo! Is she still on? Oh yeah, she is still on. All right. Okay, so Lisa,
Thank you.
yep, all right. And give that to the new grandbaby if you can't use it.
Yes.
Or Jacob will probably make good use of it. All right, thank you, Charles. All right, so do we have any other questions?
I just put one in the chat, Becky, for Michael.
Ah, okay, let's see. How to tell when to pick the tomato. All right, who wants to hit on that
This will be
one?
his first year.
All right, Michael.
You know, last year, I wanted to grow a new personal best tomato. And of course, I wanted it to get as big as it possibly could. But on the other hand, I also wanted to pick it and get an official weight on it before, it started leaking or whatever. So it's kind of a balance. You don't want to pick too early and compromise your growth. On the other hand, you don't want to pick too late. And if it's leaking because of a crack or over ripening, then you can't get an official weight. And so there are a lot of people who are big tomato growers that think once they start blushing, they're pretty much done growing. And so I kind of went past first blush, but before bright red. I noticed at the bottom on the blossom, that's where they tend to ripen the fastest. So I was really keeping an eye on the bottom of the tomato where it would get redder and redder. And because I wanted it to be official and not, lose my shot at having a big 7+ pound tomato, I picked it before the entire thing got red. But like I said, once they start blushing, a lot of people think you're not really going to get that much more weight on them anyway.
Yeah, and
Mahalo, Cindy.
what a lot of growers will tell you, giant tomato growers, is between 50% red and 75% red. So you can kind of gauge it by color, but honestly, the second they start blushing, I look over every square inch of that tomato every single, probably 5 times a day, to be honest with you, because you don't want to run into an issue with a soft spot or leaking, because that will disqualify you from the competition. As you can see behind me, the 9-pounder, you see it's a little not quite red there. This was about I think the day before, maybe the day that I picked it. So I left after I picked it and it was so firm, I realized I probably left a day or 2 on it. And I don't think they grow too much, but I guess unless we grow them on a scale, we'll never know. They definitely slow down to a snail's pace when you're doing the circumference measurement, but
talking about when to pick, I know for myself, it never fails that it seems like, especially like if you have instead of a single tomato, you might, of course, you want the mega blooms, but sometimes the way the tomatoes are forming, part of it grows faster than like the other part. And so it also ripens a little bit faster than the other part. Is there something you can do to like even it all out, or is that just the luck of how it grows?
I think that's the luck of the draw there.
Yeah, when you're dealing with mega blooms or multi blossoms, fused blossoms, you're getting a few different tomatoes in reality hooked together. So they may be a day or 2 off on their ripening and their growth. And that's especially if you get those caterpillar blooms, those can I've seen those go 3 or 4 days, apart from the first, when you get the first kind of blushing to the end. So I don't know. It's a risk. Whenever you leave it go red, and you run the risk of losing it as an official weight.
Yeah, so then you just basically have to look at the reddest part of the tomato and base your harvest date on that then. Okay.
When it grows like that, like one side gets fat,
Mhm.
how do you keep it from splitting? So that's my big problem, is that once it starts growing, the side that's big, it splits, and then it's done.
Did you hear that question? Okay, nice and loud again,
No.
Sandy.
How do you, when the tomato grows at a different pace on different sides, and one side is bigger, how do you keep it from splitting? Because I get like, even my little cherry tomatoes will split.
Can you repeat her question for us?
Are
Oh,
you
guys not
saying
hearing it? Okay.
there's,
She says whenever it's uneven, she said that the larger size will split. And so she's wondering how to prevent that one side from splitting.
well, in the giant world, we help, there's a couple things. First off, we always cover our tomatoes so that the skin does not ripen with the sun or firm up, because when it firms up and you still get growth, that causes the flesh to split. So in a giant tomato, we cover it with like a little white, towel or rag, or sheet. And then that will help so that the flesh does not the sun will cause the flesh to harden a little, and then you'll get that splitting, because you'll get that continued growth late into the growth. Another part to that is, I believe, water again. If you have inconsistent watering, that can cause splitting, because you get abnormal levels of growth. And when you get that surge of growth and the skin's a little bit tight, you'll get the natural splitting. And why it's happening on the bigger side might just be that, there's a lot more cells concentrated there. It's growing more on that side, and the skin is a little bit tighter or firm on that side.
Did that answer your question, Sandy? Yeah. Okay, thank you. Okay,
I have
so.
a question.
Oh, okay, go ahead, Donna.
Is there an optimal number of gallons of water per day per tomato?
No, it's going to be based on your soil. If the soil holds water more, you'll water less. If it's very sandy and it drains well, you'll have to water more. As you've probably heard, I'm sure Cindy and me and others that have talked tomatoes don't like wet feet. They don't like water, around the base of them or their roots. So you really, like Cindy said earlier, err on the side of less water. Of course, if you're growing in sand, then you really can't water. I mean, it'll dry out right away. So it really comes down to what type of soil you're watering in, to give you an idea as to, if it would be a half gallon a day or whatever. So.
And Donna, I do grow in sand, and so my soil still does look quite dry. What I did last year, which I really like for my sandy, really fast draining soil, is I spread ground cover over the top of that, which is like a thick landscape fabric. And that prevented the soil from drying out too much. And so I was using drip lines to very slowly and steadily feed, but it wasn't evaporating away like it had in previous years with that ground cover kind of mulching the area. And also, really, the variety of tomato that you grow too will be dependent on how much water you give them. Like the Domingo variety, which a lot of us are growing for size right now, seem to be particularly resistant to having a lot of water.
And I see
Thank
that
you.
Donna had another question, or maybe it was kind of already covered, and that was about the optimum soil blend for tomatoes in pots.
I set up my tomato soil exactly like I set up my pumpkin soil. And so when Cecil was talking about balancing the soil, using the soil estimation calculator, getting all the major and minor nutrients in balance. I just do it all the same as with the pumpkins. I think that that's good practice. As far as growing in a container though, maybe Chris can talk to that a little bit more because I'm not experienced in container growing.
So when I grew, there was a year where I grew everything in containers. I mean, not pumpkins, but all my tomatoes and even some zucchini and stuff like that. And what I did was I went to the local landscape store or soil where they make soils, different blends, and they had several different blends. And I asked them, I said, do you guys have a soil test? And they had soil tests for all of their blends. Now, obviously, it may, they probably do it once and that's the one they go with. So it may vary a little, but I looked at the soil that I was trying to line up with the most. And one of the blends that they had line up for tomatoes and pumpkins, almost perfect. I mean, everything on the soil test just lines up at a really good level. So that's the one that I went with. So I bought a yard of it, maybe a couple yards of it, and I filled up all my 20-gallon containers, and that's what I went with for the year. Now, I have to feed? Yes, I had to feed because obviously in a bucket, there's only so much nutrients in there, and they will deplete it. But I think if you can, try to find a landscape center that offers soil tests of their product. If you can't, then you could always go with, to me, it's hit and miss, but you could go with, something like a Miracle Grow that has released, time released nutrients in it. But I have better luck when I use actual soil mix versus, kind of a peat heavy, or a lot of them are pine heavy mixes.
I definitely agree with that last statement. Don't try to grow it in like even what they call potting soil. It's more peat and bark than it is anything else. You need to get they do have bag topsoil too if you can't find a landscaping place like he's talking. But you want to grow it in dirt or at least a sandy dirt.
Yes.
There's one more thing I want to add. I've changed my potting soil mix for starting my giants this year, and I just wasn't really that happy with the drainage I was seeing. And so I would think it would be super important if you were going to be growing in a container to, make sure you had a high level of drainage. And if you really can only use potting soil, then get some crushed pumice or perlite. And when I was potting up my giants this year, I did 4 parts of potting mix to 1 part of perlite. And that seemed to be just like the magic ratio of product to achieve perfect drainage in that potting mix.
So that's my question for you, Cindy. Because you said you grow in sand, sand doesn't really hold anything. So how do you feed your tomatoes? Because the sand won't hold anything if you feed them like a liquid feed, right?
No, not really, not for long anyway. And so that's why I put that landscape cover mulch down to help keep that moisture a little more even and from going away. But I also feed daily. And so what I've got going on, or I've got drip lines in my patch, probably in the tomato patch, I've got them every 3 feet. I don't want them too close because I want to encourage the plants to root out and to seek the water and seek the feed. So these drip lines are feeding in the tomato patch twice a day for a half hour a day.
Well, so
And,
that was my question,
and-
because our soil here is really thick. It's not loamy at all. So it doesn't drain well.
Uh-huh.
You get a lot of water. So I was wondering how the feed, you have to feed more often, I guess, if it's more sandy.
Yeah, and so I'm feeding at every watering. I've got a tank where I mix the nutrients and then it's getting pumped in through my lines.
What
So
about
just small amount.
what do you think about the hydroponic? Because for the last year's 5-gallon bucket, I tried 1 5-gallon fabric pot, and then I did 1 5-gallon hydroponic. And that one grew
Yeah.
beautifully. It was big, it was bushy, it was really green and really nice, but I didn't get fruit.
Oh, did you get flowers?
I got just a few flowers, and they didn't look like they opened all the way before they fell off. I mean, but the bush was beautiful, but no fruit.
Hmm.
So while you were feeding your hydroponics, did you change to a phosphorus and potassium type
Phosphorus.
feed?
No.
Yeah.
So whenever it's time
Yeah.
for your blooming, you want to go away from your nitrogen and start hitting it hard with phosphorus and potassium, and that's what they call bloom buster, and it'll bust out the blooms then.
So is that when you see the first buds coming out, or? After it
So
flowers?
Even-
timing on a tomato, you could do it at any time. You want the bush to be the right size.
Right. Got it. Thank you.
All right. I was just looking in the chat. It looks like Ed had asked a question a while back of what the record on tomatoes grown in a 5-gallon bucket. What was the record on that? Do you guys remember? Or?
I don't know. It was big though. You remember, Chris?
Yeah, I do. I mean, are we talking Hawaii or are we talking worldwide?
Well, we know what our record was for Hawaii because Lisa's the one that grew it, but.
Then it was Rick, is it Rick Spaznani?
Spazzini.
Yeah,
Spaziani out of
Yeah,
Oregon. Yeah.
true, I believe. Oh man, let me think if I can remember. I thought it was almost 7 pounds, but it
I
was.
think it was 6.66.
Was it? Okay. It was pretty good size. It was a very good size one. And then I know another guy in Kentucky ended up growing. Well, he cheated it. He used a couple 5 buckets, so we can't count that. But
Wow.
but yeah, Rick he grew up. I mean, it was. In fact, he made a joke that it was bigger than he grows out in his patch. So he might have to stay with the 5-gallon buckets.
Cindy, Lisa had made the comment that they used black cinder in their soil mix to help with not having it be too wet of soil. So, and Lisa grew our heaviest tomato last year in a 5-gallon bucket.
Oh.
Yeah.
Well, I grew one of my biggest pumpkins ever, and the spot in our field that I turned into pumpkin patch where when we were building our house, we had the burn pile. And so I'm kind of a fan of wood ash and cinder and getting carbon from sources like that.
And you can always take heavier soil and add sand and increase your drainage. Sand is readily available.
So Ed, you don't have any questions regarding your lawn gourds or bushel gourds or your marrows? Weren't you gonna, because you were gonna grow a marrow, or is it marrow or marrow? Marrow.
I haven't done anything with that, with the marrow yet. I've got some loofah planted, and I'm just trying I've had the same issue with hydroponics. I grew a fantastic bush, but very little fruit. The roots were crazy. So I think the recommended hydroponic solution is the one that gives you the bush. And I got to find a way to change that to get plants. But yeah, I was happy with the plant itself, to get fruit. I was happy with the plant, but boy, I just didn't get a whole lot of fruit on that at all.
Are you guys that are doing hydroponics, are they outside in the sun or are you using artificial lights?
Outside, but not direct, no direct sun. And no, I mean, obviously, I'm controlling in a covered area because I don't want the leaves messed up. You know, I don't want to get mildew or anything on it.
Because your fruiting is going to happen. Yes, light is going to affect your fruiting too. But if you do some research on bloom busters, bloom boosters and bloom busters, look at those. They've got fertilizers that are specifically designed to increase blooms.
Right.
And once you get your blooms going, that's where your fruit's coming from.
I think that's going to be hard to do with hydroponics unless you switch out to a different solution at some point.
Right.
Yeah,
You're gonna have to change what you're adding.
Yeah.
And change the amount of phosphorus.
Yep.
So when you're looking at your fertilizer for hydroponics, you know, I'm assuming it's a totally soluble mix. You've
Right.
got your three numbers there, your NPK, your nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. You're
Right.
going to want to look for one in the beginning with maybe a little bit higher N, your first number. But as you get that plan established, you're going to want that second number, your P or phosphorus number, to be probably the higher number. And so they do have those mixes out there and in fully soluble form, and you can order them online. And I run them through my fertilizer barrel through my drip lines, and you're just going to have to change your mix as the season goes. And then, you know, once that fruit is established, then you're going to want to bump up your potassium, your third number in the mix, to help support the growth of that fruit.
Interesting. Okay.
So 2 years ago, I did hydroponics for a winter grow, and I got a 1.4 pound tomato. And what I did to grow the bush was, it was a hydroponics formula. I can't remember the brand now, but it was like a 24-12-12. And then when flowering came time, I switched over to an 8-52-24. And then when fruit came on, it was like a 10-10-29. And that's what I ended it with. And I was able to, in the basement, under all artificial lighting, pull off a tomato just over a pound, which I thought was pretty impressive with 1.5 feet of snow outside.
Whoa, cool. Something to shoot for anyway. Definitely here.
Cindy, when do you start the potassium after the fruit is grown?
Oh, yeah, once it's set, then I switch over to higher potassium feeds. You know, they as far as pumpkins go, they really kick into gear following day 20. I mean, really, once they're on and they're doubling in size, but then you start to really see the big gains once they're, you know, beach ball size, day 20 or so. And so that's when I typically switch to the higher potassium, that third number on your fertilizer bag.
Okay, well, I want to switch gears from tomatoes to sunflowers, because I think everybody that's online has either grown sunflowers in the past or will be growing them this year. And so I don't know, Cindy, I don't think you've grown sunflowers, have you? Or have you? I know Chris has.
I have done a little bit, but I was going to do it last year because I was doing Master Gardener. And then I read about how the sunflowers, every part of the sunflower plant is poisonous, even its roots, and they will poison other plants nearby. And because I set the goal of being the #1 master gardener in the world, I did not want any poisonous roots near all my competition plants, because I was going to grow 2 on both sides of my long gourd trellis of seeds that Chris had given me. And then I just thought, no way, I'm not going to risk it. I've got to focus on my goal. And so he's going to be the sunflower man, not me.
So what's funny about that poisonous thing is that tomato you see there was growing probably about 4 feet, maybe 5 feet from, I grew an 18-footer this last year. So I know those roots were interacting, because you can't grow something 5 feet from something else and have it not interact. So where I have my tomatoes are right next to my trellis where I tie my tall sunflowers. So I don't know. I mean, if there's truth to that, then this tomato is either
Chris, it could have been the first 12-pound tomato if you hadn't had that sunflower right there.
Well,
Exactly. That's exactly. Whenever I interviewed Steve Geddes and he told me he didn't use mycorrhiza, I was like, well, could have had a world record.
Man, don't tell me that. You guys could be right. I grew a one of my biggest pumpkins, almost 1,400 pounds, with a wide head sunflower that got to about 27 inches wide, and I grew that about 4 feet from the stump, actually about 3 feet from the stump. So I don't know if I completely buy into I would have to see some sort of a research as to how it negatively affects it, because I just seen that this last year, probably the same article or feed that you've seen, Cindy. And I thought to myself after that, I've been mixing my sunflowers with all my giants the entire time, because I don't have a separate place to plant them. So I either I would have grown some really, really big stuff, or there's not as much truth to that as, some of these writers maybe sometimes I think writers like to embellish just to get more words on a page. So I don't know. I'd have to look at the research, but I have personally not seen it affect anything. And my long gourds are growing right next to the sunflowers on the other side. So I have long gourds 4 feet from it and on one side, and tomatoes 4 to 5 feet from it on the other side. And my long gourd, I had one that got a little rotted end, but it was pushing 130 inches. So it was not affecting the plant at all.
Well, everybody knows somebody that has fed milk to a pumpkin.
I have never.
So what I'm saying is you can't believe everything you read.
Okay, so a couple questions with the sunflowers that have always kind of been on my mind, especially for this year, because I actually had been donated quite a few different sunflowers and sunflower seeds. And so it's going to be interesting to get these seeds started and get them out to the families and everything. But, I don't know what to expect. I know on the packages and stuff, some of them say tall sunflowers. Some of them say, I'm assuming that they're wide-headed sunflowers because of the width, that they were, where the seeds came from. But again, I mean, should they be both grown the same way? Is there anything different that, because I'm not sure, I don't want to get a call from somebody that says, oh, well, I don't really have that big of a head on my sunflower, but boy, it's growing tall, and so do they have to do different things?
A real quick rundown on growing the two different ones. I for the most part, I prepare the whole the same. Lots of nitrogen. You want nitrogen pretty heavy. But growing them, the tall sunflower, you're going to want to grow with a lot of support. You're going to want to take its goal is to get as tall as possible. So if you can support the actual stalk, then it doesn't have to put that energy into making a thick stalk. It just goes and goes and goes. Whereas your wide heads, you don't have to worry about the stalk. Your goal is the head of it. And you may have to support the head once it opens, because a lot of times they're so heavy that they'll kink. And if they kink, then you've then lost your nutrients. My biggest head I ever grew was on one that there was zero kink to it. So it got the full energy of that stalk, which was like a tree, and it just pumped everything up into those seeds and made that seed head really, really wide. So a real general brief overview. The tall ones you're going to grow for height, and you're going to support them every 3 or 4 feet up. You're going to want to tie them to something. I use my long gourd trellis, but you can use whatever. And then the wide heads you want to just allow to grow. Obviously, if you have a lot of wind in an area, you may have to support them. I've had some of my wide heads blow over or snap because of the wind.
Should they typically, in general, regardless if they're tall or the, wide head sunflowers, should they just grow straight up? Because after a while, it just seems like they bend over. I would imagine that's a natural thing. I mean, I know at some point when that head starts to get a little heavy, it'll bow, but I'm just kind of wondering, is there a way to keep it going straight?
Yeah, it'll naturally grow straight unless the wind starts to push it around. And then when that head opens up and becomes heavy, then you get that natural like drooping or hanging. But otherwise it will grow straight up, and obviously on the tall sunflower, you're going to want to support that straight up growth.
So how would we know?
Whenever I had one that was, whenever I had some that were growing, Becky, until the seeds get start to make the seeds, the head will support itself, because the head actually moves, towards the sun, during the day.
Yeah.
But once it sets its seeds and it's pretty much done, that's whenever you got to tie it so that it doesn't continue to droop, because the big heads they'll completely turn and go like that, which really isn't a terrible thing, except that it might cause a kink.
I was gonna say ours, they'll pinch.
The tall ones, the high, if you really want it to be tall, you got to tie it so that it can't droop.
Okay. And so at what point would you say that it's considered for a tall? Because again, some of these seeds that I have, I don't know if they were meant for being a tall sunflower or for the head. And so then what would I do on that?
Yep. So I learned something about pollination that I didn't really realize with sunflowers, and that is that a sunflower rarely will pollinate itself. It needs to have bees or other pollinators pollinate from another sunflower. So what that means is any sunflower around you could contribute to the pollen. And because of the way a sunflower opens, if you've ever watched it, it'll almost open in rows every day. Every few hours, a new row will open, and you're getting visited by many, many bees. So you could have one sunflower head, and it could have many, many traits mixed into that sunflower head, unless you somehow isolated that, which technically a wild sunflower in the field could, pollen could be introduced. Now, generally speaking, if you have your sunflowers kind of clumped together, the bees are going to be somewhat lazy, and they're just going to stick with all those sunflowers. And like with me, I got the hives right next door. So they're going maybe, I don't know, a couple football fields from their hive to the sunflowers. So there's no sunflowers between. So for me, I felt fairly confident that they were being pollinated correctly. However, and the advantage was my wide heads open before my talls. If you have wide heads and talls open at the same time, there's obviously a chance you could have a big head tall or a tall big head.
So I guess we'll have to just kind of see then, but that makes a lot of sense because I know some of the people that are here will tell you that we have had some seeds that were given to us that were supposed to have grown large heads, and they ended up giving us ornamental looking sunflower heads, or you'd get a whole bunch of them on one plant, and they were all from like the same set of seeds. So it'll be interesting because again, I've got a wide variation of seeds that have come to me because we were, sunflowers seem to be a real popular one for us here to grow. And so yeah, I want to get with Sharon though, because I see she had her hand up for a little bit. Go ahead, Sharon.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. First, I just wanted to say thank you for the guests for coming again. I always really enjoy this seminar. It's fun to hear, even the plants I haven't tried yet. It's just interesting to hear what the questions, the issues are. So one of my issues is space. I have a small yard in Hilo. So I love to experiment. And so I'm, always trying to have to be strategic and try to figure out where I can still work. So I had originally planned to ask a question sort of about companion, or like which of these are bad to plant together, like the tomatoes with other types of plants. But now I hadn't heard that about sunflowers just being poisonous to plants in general. So now I really have a more urgent level of the question, because I was planning to work on giant tomatoes this year and sunflowers. And then of course I have beans, I have peppers, I have all sorts of other garden vegetables growing around along with tropical trees. So anyway, if you have any suggestions on things to avoid, I'd appreciate it. Thank you.
Whenever I hear companions, generally speaking, the only thing I'd really companion up would be maybe a plant that would pull pests from that plant. So there's a few plants out there that will attract the pests. That'd really be the only thing I'd companion together in a smaller area, because you don't want plants within a foot or two of each other if you can help it, because they're just going to take so much nutrients from each other. It'll be fighting whether you like it or not. But I'm not, unless Cecil or Cindy have something with the companion plants.
I was just going to say on the sunflowers, again, not having grown competitively, but I have grown sunflowers, and sometimes, the birds plant them and I let them grow. And I've let them grow in my gardens for years and years and years. And I've never had, many times, 2 feet in between something and a sunflower, and never noticed that plant struggled at all. So I'm not really buying, I don't know. I suppose all things are possible, but I know that whenever I pull up my sunflower roots, the root ball itself isn't that big. So it's not like it's stretching out there and going across your garden. And as I have dug up other plants, especially the pumpkins, the roots will go a long ways. But if they found that, I believe in my heart, if they found that the sunflower area was a bad spot, they'd just go around it. I don't think they're gonna, the roots are not, especially on a vine type plant, the roots are not right under the plant. They go everywhere. So yes, you need more roots. Would I be terribly concerned of putting a sunflower next to a pumpkin or next to a tomato? Not really. I guess I would have to do some experimenting. I'm a lot like Chris.
Just don't grow them near your coconut palm trees, because I can tell you from experience that those coconut palms will take over everything. So that's why my coconuts are so huge, because they take everything from the other plants.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's maybe companion isn't the right word. I just, like sometimes they say like, if you've been growing something, like don't don't plant something else there, like maybe the soil, like tomatoes, like if you plant tomatoes somewhere, that'll somehow make the soil not suitable for something else later? Or is that, you're always I'm adding compost and stuff to the soil, so maybe that isn't really a thing to worry about.
So maybe what you're talking about is some type of rotation. Different types of plants have different types of disease. And whenever you have a certain type of a plant and you continue to plant that same plant in the same area, that kind of disease can build up. And so people move things around. As far as, like tomatoes, I don't really remember. I mean, I do remember my grandfather telling me stuff like this, but I never really dug into it and tried to keep it in my head. I do try to rotate to a new area. I don't continue planting the same spot all the time. But if you're in a small yard, you really don't have that choice. You can just go ahead and continue to add and build up your soil. And just like I said, in most of, especially the vines, the tomatoes, pumpkins, watermelons, those kind of plants, their roots go for many, many, many feet. So I've heard people say, well, I put my tomato here in this 5-foot spot last year, so I'm going to move it over 4 feet and put it in this spot. I don't really think that really is going to do that much for you.
Okay, nice and loud, unless you want to come up. Okay, got a question for Chris.
Hi, Chris. Back to the sunflowers. A couple years ago, I grew one of those giants. So I got like a 17-inch head out of it. All the seeds were empty, so it didn't pollinate at all. So do you think we should grow? Because I only had the one. I planted 2. One of them died when it was really little. I only had the one. So do we plant it with another giant so that we keep, the bees will pollinate both and it'll stay that giant? Because is it more risky to plant it with just some garden store variety and then it'll get small? Will it damage the size at all to mix it?
Yes, if you want those seeds to stay giant, try to plant 2, 3, 4 to kind of group, because if you plant just 2 and they don't open at the same time, then you've kind of lost that. But I like to kind of group plant. So if you have an area where you can maybe, even if they're a little closer, you just got to feed a little heavier. But say you have a little, a little rock ring or something, and you can plant 3, 4, 5 giant sunflowers in that, and just kind of a living bouquet, so to speak. And then what that does is it allows the bees to then go from one to another and do the true pollination. So
because we didn't get any, all the seeds.
Yeah, if you're running into those empty seeds, I would venture to guess more times than not that there wasn't another sunflower around to bring the pollen into. So it just
there wasn't. There really wasn't.
Yep.
So now, okay, so we get our starts from Becky when we start for the contest. So of course, there's only a limited number of plants that we get. So
Yep.
if I get the one giant, is there a variety that we can pick up somewhere or order online, you think, that wouldn't be harmful to plant near it, like another kind of maybe just giant that we can grow with it as pollinators?
Yes. Me. I have giant sunflowers. So if you want some giant sunflowers, get my information from Becky and I'll ship you some.
Awesome. Yeah, we definitely do. Because our sunflower grew really, really well. We watched it daily, how it moved around with the sun. We tied it up pretty good. We didn't get a droop. The head was really heavy. But
Good.
we didn't get a droop until it was fairly big already. And then that's the only thing that was disappointing, is that we didn't get any seeds from it.
Because you go into any of those stores that have those seed kiosks, and they always have the mammoth
right,
sunflower heads. And I've grown those before, and a lot of them don't get much more than I mean, if you hit 12 inches, you're happy on that. So
Right.
if you want to use those seeds for next year and the year after and the year after, you want to make sure you're at least attempting to give the biggest genetics
Yeah,
possible
Right.
for the future generations.
Yep. Okay. Perfect. Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you, Chris. All right. Oh, Ed, are you trying to say something? You're
Oh.
on mute.
Yes, I guess I have to unmute, huh?
Yep.
It's my understanding, and maybe it's incorrect, that bees seem to be pretty particular about what they go to. Once they start on a sunflower patch, they would stay on the sunflower patch all day. Whereas as a carpenter bee is not that choosy. We seem to have a problem because I have never ever seen a bee on any of my giant sunflowers. You can't get, in fact, I've brought other plants up close to the giant sunflower, not related to it, and you might see a couple of bees go to that. But I think the problem is that they stay with that particular type of plant, and they're not interested in going in a singular or two sunflowers. They're looking for food all day long, or pollen all day long, whatever. Any comment on that?
So do you have a honeybees, the European honeybee over there?
Yeah. Yes.
Okay. How about bumblebees? The yellow black big
Which
ones.
are related to bumblebees, but I haven't seen any in months now, and my lilikoi, my passion fruit, is suffering from that. They're gone. I don't know what happened.
So what I've found is the bees, when they find a good pollen source, they literally will exploit it, which means they'll use that. They'll just go back and forth from the hive to the pollen, and they won't look much elsewhere, which is why you got those sunflowers.
Right.
In an extreme situation, you may have to get up there, and you got to realize, you got to watch how that sunflower opens. But you're going to have two separate sunflowers opening at the same time. Get up there with a Q-tip and then rub that pollen on one Q-tip, bring it over to the other one, and then rub it on the other one. And it's a multi-day, deal, because those sunflowers will open just a little bit every few hours to every day. So if you cannot find a bee or a butterfly or a moth or nothing that's going on to your sunflowers, which I find that the way mine are attacked, I find that hard to believe, but it's I suppose it's possible. So, but if that's the case and you want some pollinated, sunflowers, it's just like with a pumpkin, or where you're taking the pollen from the male flower and you're putting it to the female. It would be the same sort of thing from one sunflower to the next sunflower.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Yep.
And Donna made a comment, Ed, and says that our carpenter bees, it's our carpenter bees that is the main pollinator for lilikoi.
Yes, I know that because 2 years ago I had to hand pollinate everything, all the lilikoi. Last year I didn't pollinate a single one because I had plants that encouraged, in addition to the lilikoi, carpenter bees, but I haven't seen one in a couple of months, not one in my yard. And I've got the passion fruit going off right now. I really don't want to hand pollinate.
Okay, so the question was, is there a certain time that we should be pollinating those sunflower heads?
Because of the way they open, you just want to, I've never had to do it before, but if you ever have grown sunflowers, you'll notice how the very edge will open first, and then it will open towards the center, making that head bigger. So as that row, you get rings, they will open throughout the day, multiple days. So there's not really a special time. Like with pumpkins, we want to do it early in the morning, and really it's more so we're trying to hit a certain temperature with pumpkins. along with the time of day. But with sunflowers, you can really pollinate throughout the day because that flower flowers for several days.
Okay, go ahead, Brian. Nice and loud.
Does anyone use some type of attractant for the bees, like sugar water or something like that?
Again, if the point is that once they start on something that they find nectar or pollen that they're happy with, it's my understanding that they stick with that all day long. So it wouldn't help to get another food source in there. Apparently, I'm not sure. But
Although, Ed, didn't you say you used another pollinator flower to attract the bees in?
Yes.
So it did work in a sense of bringing them to the area. Oh, it did not.
Well,
Okay.
it worked to get bees there because the bees were at a lower level, also working on the same type of plant, but they didn't go from that plant to sunflowers.
Okay.
Like, what if we sprayed the sunflower? Like, what if we sprayed the sunflower itself with like honey water or something?
I see somebody commented about their bees liking their sunflowers. I don't doubt that. That's multiple, not a single sunflower or two. Especially the tall ones. There's no reason for them to go up there unless you're putting them close to a palm tree and the bees go crazy when the palms are flowering. But I doubt that they're going to go to a sunflower.
Yeah, and I've seen that even at my house because we'll get clusters of bees all over the palm trees, and then on the bottle brush bush that you guys know that I have in my front yard, and you'll see them go from that coconut palm to the bottle brush, but they'll stay there for like a few days and stuff. But my sunflowers are not very far from that. And nope, if I'm lucky, if I see one bee, I'll be real surprised. But yeah, so it's interesting. So, okay, so it looks like Lisa needs to head out. Thank you, Lisa, for participating. And then, yeah, so I guess it was Sharon that had made the comment about the honeybees liking her sunflower.
Thank you, Becky.
Yeah, thank you, Lisa. And she says, but not only had one open, so I guess that it was no issue, or that, boy, I tell you, I need to get new glasses. So I guess that was the issue, no seeds. Okay.
Yeah, sorry, Becky. Maybe it's easier if I just talk. I was just saying that, I was just to Ed, I was saying, I know they will go to sunflower. They did like my sunflowers. It's just, I didn't get seeds, but probably because it wasn't the right timing, but they will go. But I also like get frustrated sometimes when I want them to pollinate, my lime tree, and they want to be on this basil plant. I'm like, come on, move it. So that is maybe an interesting challenge here where we have so many flowering trees all year round, like unpredictably somewhat.
Cool.
I have bushel gourd and long gourd questions.
Okay, so we've got some bushel and long gourd questions. Go ahead, Dave.
So you wanted to try long gourds this year, and I know we gotta do a trellis for it. But the ground area, how much ground area should I devote to that plant?
You guys hear his question? Nope. Okay, David, come on up.
I did. I heard his question.
Oh, okay.
So he wanted to know how much a ground area around the trellis to devote to the long gourd plant. On mine, I've got a trellis that comes up 12 feet high. And then on the top, where's my hand? There it is. It goes out another 4 feet. And so The ground around the trellis that's dedicated just to longboards is 12 feet in front of the trellis and another 10 feet behind the trellis with 2 4-foot strips on either side of the trellis. And that's for growing 2 longboards. And so on my 12-foot high trellis, I have, it's 10 feet wide. And I will grow 1 plant on a 4-foot wide section. And then I've got a 2-foot wide ladder up the middle, but not really a ladder. It's like the 2x4s that I climb up. And then another 4-foot wide section that's made of 2x4 welded wire fencing material. So longboards have very, very aggressive root systems, and that's why I wanted to give it as much ground as possible. I spread the entire ground around the longboard trellis with landscape fabric, weed barrier, so that the soil stays moist and the weeds aren't competing for the nutrients. But those roots are really far reaching.
I was wondering if I could do it in a stock tank, that's why.
You could, it's probably going to, I would imagine it could inhibit your overall length, and probably really fill up fast with roots just because of how far reaching those roots get. They get really big, long roots.
What about a fabric pot? It'll prune, it'll air prune the roots, right?
She asked about what about a fabric pot
For longboards?
for longboards?
Yeah.
Yes.
I don't know, you know, I can't imagine keeping a gourd in a pot for very long to grow it long term. I did keep some in pots longer than I wanted to in the house last year before I planted them out, just because we had a pretty cold spring. And although they didn't get root bound like a giant pumpkin, would, they just seemed a little stunted in their growth being in pots for that long, the plant itself. So I wouldn't recommend growing it in a fabric pot or any pot if you can get by with it, because they're incredibly aggressive with their rooting.
Because
But
in
it would
my
make
in my
interesting
opinion,
experiment.
with the long gourds, you know, the vine gets probably close to 20 feet long ish, and I'm figuring the roots are at least twice as long as that. So if you know, pretty much with all of these vining plants, the root mass is about twice as much as the plant that you see. And if you try to contain that amount of root mass, you'd have to have something that would be a huge container. And I don't know what it would be. I mean, I don't even think you could really contain it in a 55-gallon drum.
So the roots go wide, as opposed to deep?
So the roots go wide opposed to deep is what was asked.
In the
They-
normal,
they-
for the normal ground, yes, they don't go super deep, but they'll run 30 and 40 feet.
I have a question about for my giant pumpkins this year too.
Okay, what, we got one more question? Go ahead.
So typically I've been growing my giant pumpkins with a weed cloth on the area. And I was thinking that could have been inhibiting what the vine could have done with the amount of roots it could have done. You know, I have been cutting at each node and burying it through the weed cloth, but I was just wondering, you know, if I just let it on top of the soil, would it potentially do better versus, you know, maybe just putting the weed cloth down where the pumpkin is growing? Or should I try to just leave the weed cloth in the entire area still.
You know, I have grown giant pumpkins with weed cover, and it is challenging. And what I found was the easiest way to do it, because it's not a bad idea, it's just very labor intensive, is in between the secondary vines, if you have like 12 to 18 inch strips of it pre-cut and rolled up like a big toilet paper roll that you can roll out as that vine or as those side vines grow. It is a great tool to use to help keep the weeds down, help keep the moisture in. And I think it could help improve rooting too by allowing those advantageous roots that grow on the vine to have the darkness that they want and the moisture levels up a little higher. And they seem to like that. So it's not a bad idea. It's just a little more labor intensive. I would rather do that as opposed to just letting it grow right on the soil surface. If those are your two options, definitely go with the weed cloth and bury it a little bit.
So one of the things
Hey,
that you
Becky-
might have a trouble with being in your environment is the wetness and the heat. So most of my life, I've grown in the South, and the weed barrier increases the heat on the plant, not necessarily the heat of the ground, but the plant itself gets more heat because of all that black. If you cover the weed barrier with some kind of mulch, if you've got straw, that helps. If you've got, in Georgia, we use pine needles. But if you cover that weed barrier up so that the sun isn't beating down on it, it helps immensely, and your plant will be much happier.
Because I wasn't really worried about the moisture, obviously, because where I live, we're in the 250 inch to 300 inch per year zone. And mainly it's just the weed part of it, because I grew giant field pumpkins last year, and I did not use weed mat at all with the giant field pumpkins. And just in between the leaves, I just have some weeds pop up. But it wasn't bad, and it seemed like the vine was happier. I mean, like you said, it could have been just because it's less heat, possibly. The field pumpkin did better without the weed mat. I was just wondering if it might help the giant pumpkins in the same way.
Most people don't use it, and many people don't even want to use any kind of a mulch or anything like that. Part of good soil is air. So if anything that you put down, if it causes the soil to pack down or mat, you're losing air. So that also can affect your plants. But what I found with the weed barrier, especially in the heat, was I had to do something to reduce the amount of heat. And once I did that, then the weed barrier was fine.
And then with the bushel gourds, would you would keep them separate from the giant pumpkin area? They'd have to have their own area.
Yeah, the bushel gourds, they take up a smaller footprint in the patch than the giant pumpkin. So I would have them in the giant pumpkin patch in their own designated area. They're going to probably take up, about as much as you'd want to dedicate to your field pumpkin, your competitive field pumpkins, maybe half the size or less, maybe a third the size of a giant pumpkin, but they can coexist in the same neighborhood.
Yeah, my giant field pumpkin went nuts last year. It took over my corner of the horse pasture that I had, and I don't know, it was 50 by 50. About there, 50 by 50.
Oh, boy, it's
Two plant,
go
two plants
nuts. Yeah.
went, went crazy. And, but we, you know,
They took more room than our
yeah, yeah, they took more room than our giant field pumpkins. They went outside of the horse pasture, they went into my lawn, they were everywhere. They're just like, they went, eventually at the end, it was like 75 by 75. I was pollinating about 12, trying to get 12 giant field pumpkins a day. I was trying to pollinate, and most of them died off because I think the vine couldn't handle that many. And then, but where my giant field, the Atlantic giants had a struggle. And again, it was, you know, why did the Atlantic giant struggle where the giant field pumpkin didn't? And the soil samples that I did were roughly about the same. Actually, the giant field pumpkin probably had a better soil content than the field pumpkin. And but what was the difference? The main difference was no wheat cloth. So I was like, oh, maybe that was part of the problem.
There's one more, you know, the other thing about the difference between the Atlantic giants and the field pumpkins is the field pumpkins are more hardy and they're more disease tolerant. So if you have any diseases at all, it's going to affect your giants more.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, it's hard to tell here because we have so many different blights and this and that in the soils. I mean, like tomato plants out on the coast where I live, you cannot grow a tomato plant in the ground soil. It will die. There's a tomato blight, a root blight in the soil that it's going to die. You have to grow it in an above ground something where we live because it just won't do well. But also, that's what I think what happened with my son's tomato plant last year too. We had it above ground, and we're talking about earlier with because we had so much rain with your thing last year, and we had it above ground. It would basically, my above ground system turned into a lake.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We get a lot of rain out here.
Like I said, 250 to 300 inches per year is where I live, and yeah, so water is not an issue.
All right, guys.
What I was referring to on the weed bear is it actually holds in more water. It doesn't let it evaporate.
Okay, well, we've had some really good questions today. I'm glad that we were able to get technology to work for us even for this little bit of time that we've had together. And so thank you for everybody that's kind of made the effort to come out today and participate or tune in from home. And thank you to Cecil and Cindy and Chris for presenting with us. We did want to leave with a couple more door prizes. I think, you know, we're not going to give out everything that I have today. I think maybe we'll leave those other things for some other opportunities that we'll be doing throughout the year. But let's get Julie to help me. Julie hasn't helped me today yet. I'm going to have her pick out 4 names, and we did have a few people that dropped off, and as we always say, that they need to be present to win. And so I have some wow packs that I want to be able to give out today. And so Julie, go ahead and let's see if we can get 4 names of people that are hopefully here. Let's see what that one says. And the first person that's going to win nice wow pack is Sharon. Woohoo! Sharon's still on, or is it just that her camera is on but she's not?
I'm here. I'm here.
I got some wow packs for you. So next time you're in town, come see me.
Okay, I also need to pick up my Lupa seeds. So
there you go.
I'll contact you soon, Becky. Thank you. Thank you to everybody.
Yeah, remind me. All right, and then we've got Sandy. Woohoo! Sandy, come get your. Go ahead, go give that to Sandy real quick. All right. And I'm glad the people that we're picking are actually here. Run. Okay, run back here. We gotta get you to pick 2 more. I have such wonderful helpers here today. Oh, and she's wearing a 4-H t-shirt. All right. Oh, she's got 2. Let's see, you want to drop that one back in? Okay, let's see. You got more than one or is that one? Let's see what that one says. Oh, hey, did you pick this one for your dad? No, I'm teasing. All right, go give this to your dad real quick. And I got one more. Where is it? All right, well, she's a lucky drawer. She actually has been getting these out with the right names because everybody's here. Okay, pick another one and see if your lucky streak is still there. All right. Oh, Tony's not here. Oh, we can rag on Tony on that one. Okay, go ahead. I jinxed her. So now everybody that she's gonna pick is not gonna be here. Oh, Sandy, lucky, you got two. Okay, go give this one to Sandy. All right. Okay, guys, well, thank you again for coming out, and I hope you got your questions answered. And yeah, but we want to try to stay on time. It is now 11 o'clock, and so thank you guys for coming, and I'm going to go ahead and stop our recording here.